Welcome to the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. I'm JP, your host and the founder of Valmika Buyers Agency. With my background in investment banking, I'm here to share Wall Street tips and secrets for building a top 4% property portfolio. Let's dive into the world of property investment together. Welcome to another episode of Valmika Property Investing. In this episode, we're going to give our predictions for where the property growth sectors are going to be over the next year. We're going to separate these categories into residential and commercial. In the commercial space, we'll speak about offices, industrial, and retail. So let's get straight into it. 2023, even though we were still in a hiking cycle and we possibly reached the peak of the hiking cycle, had great growth in the residential area of the market. And this just shows the actual shortage of property in the market. So if you can have a recoup of the loss from the bear market. So if we take Sydney, for example, there was roughly a 7% drop, depending on the area, in property prices over the bear market, so the interest rate hiking cycle bear market. However, last year, even though interest rates possibly peaked, that entire loss was recouped and we were back at all-time highs. So very interesting how strong the demand for residential property is. It actually went against all economists' forecasts. And it just shows how Australians really value property more so than economists realize. So where does that leave us for 2024? 2024, we've got positive real yields in Australia. What that means is that the actual debt yields or bond yields, government bond yields, are higher than inflation. So what that does is it slows down the economy. And because you've got this positive real yield, you're seeing inflation that coming down quite nicely. As a result, if this inflation doesn't get sticky over the year and continues on its path, we're likely to see interest rate cuts towards the end of the year. And this is a great driver of property value growth, so increase in property prices. So let's look at residential. Have you noticed that over the last year, the rentals for residential have skyrocketed? So just anecdotally, I was speaking with a real estate agent, and she said that she would market the rentals at a certain level. People would come in almost doubling that level and saying that they will look to increases again if need be. So looking at some isolation, some rental amounts have increased by almost 30%. So what this means is that the yield return, so the gross yield return on residential has increased quite nicely over the last year. Now, if you combine that with interest rate cuts towards the end of the year, that just adds fuel to the fire to get an increase in property prices, because the demand will be higher to higher yields in the property, and then of course cheaper funding through interest rate cuts. So we think that residential is going to do, that sector is going to do exceptionally well over the next year. And investors that are sitting on the sideline, they don't wait for interest rate cuts to happen. As soon as they feel that there's certainty that the next move is down, they'll start to pile in. So you'll see that the bull market will start prior to the actual interest rate cuts happening. Now moving into commercial. So let's take the first category of commercial, and that's office space. Now, office space has really struggled since COVID, and that's because there's still remains high vacancy rates. So vacancy rates of the 2023 were 14%, And this just results in a decline in office space value. So it's the yield decompression, so yields going up, just devalue that asset class quite significantly, and it continues to weigh on that sector. And that's all got to do with the work from home dilemma. Even though companies are encouraging their staff to go back, there's still this high vacancy rate. In the high end sector, so where fund managers invest, you'll see that book values of these office blocks, for example, do not represent the actual reality, because they've got high face value rents, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of these hidden incentives. So taking those incentives into account, you find that property valuations are much lower than they're reporting on book values. This is a generalization, but this is just an observation that I've seen in the market. So office space will continue to struggle. If we look at the next commercial category, and that's industrial, this has been the darling of the commercial space. And in 2022, yields or cap rates were around 4.6%, and that has decompressed to 5.3% over 2023. So this is the lowest yielding category, and it's for good reason. The reason why it's the lowest yielding category is because it's the one that's got the most demand. But looking at those yields, let's say you've got debt yields around 6% and higher, but you had cap rates in industrial at 4.6%, you've got a negative drag there, because it's not a positive cash flow element. However, the trick comes in is because you've had a large increase in industrial rentals. So industrial rentals in 2023 went up 17%. This far outweighs the decompression from 4.6 to 5.3 by like 1%. That 16% drop in price for the yield compression is more than made up for in strong rental growth. In fact, that rental growth was 23% in 2022. So even though you're buying it at a low yield, within 1 year, that high rental percentage increase, pushes up your yield quite significantly. And this is why we still think that industrial is going to grow. We think that rental demand is going to grow. It's very difficult with the costs to replace these assets, a high cost to replace those assets. So that'll increase demand. Also, you'll have a decrease in interest rates. So not only do you have this yield compression up to 5.3%, which will attract more investors, but you'll have cheaper funding rates, and eventually that will pull it down into positive cash flow territory. And then, of course, you've got the rental increase over the next year. So we're very bullish still on industrial, like most of the market, as a result. If we move into the next category, and that's retail. So retail has been the most stable sector, and it has slight yield compression. So in 2022 to 2023, we had a 5.7% cap rate, and that decompressed to 5.9. So a slight decompression with a 6.2% vacancy rate. So that vacancy rate has remained consistent in 2022 and 2023, but it's been the most stable. Now, this is a result of the strange economy that we've had over the bear high interest rate cycle. So retail sales over that period of time has remained surprisingly strong. And that's because of the high savings rates that we had during the COVID era. So people were able to work from home, save a lot on costs, put a lot of capital away, and that kept that buying power of the retail market strong. So that kept retail sales going strong through 2023. Now, of course, moving into the end of the year, when we're expecting the interest rate cuts, that fuels retail spending again. So we do think this sector will remain stable, and especially for good retail sectors. So for example, like if you own assets with tenants that are in the essential services area, like the medical sector and professional services, The other area where there'll be strong demand for assets will be with tenants that are in the fast food categories and non-discretionary retail like supermarkets, for example. So that will remain stable, but we think the higher growth element will come in industrial out of the three categories of commercial. But it's good to have a mix and be diversified in your portfolio. It's also important to mention industrial, the vacancy rate went from 0.6% to 0.8% over 2023 and remains the tightest vacancy rate in the developed world for this category. So it is an exceptionally strong category, and we believe it will continue to be. I hope you found this episode valuable and insightful, and we look forward to speaking with you in the next one. Please help our podcast and give us a like, and any comments you leave below will be very helpful. Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Valmika Property Investing Podcast. If you're interested in our services, please visit us at valmikaproperty.com. Remember, the content shared in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. For personalized financial advice, always consult your trusted financial advisor or professional. See you in the next episode.